day to everyone who has joined us in impressively large numbers from all over the world. So for some of you, it's morning, some of you are in your own evening, and some of you are in between. I myself am Stuart MacDonald, and I'm moderating this webinar entitled Understanding the True Value of Distributed Ledger Technology from London, where I'm based. This is the latest in the Thought Leadership series of educational webinars offered by Distributed Ledger Technology, or DLT, and Cryptoassets investment experts, Aaro Capital. These webinars are designed for investment professionals to learn more about this fast-growing, often complex and fast-maturing space, still often utterly misunderstood. And this is a space that offers really exciting and, dare I say, huge investment opportunities that are notably uncorrelated to both traditional and even other alternative investments. And we're getting serious interest from some quite serious investors these days, ranging from Fidelity to Paul Tudor Jones. And Aaro Capital is the first player, to my knowledge, with a truly and authentically institutional quality multi-manager approach to it. This approach is very research driven, and this is reflected in Aaro's use of advisors like Dr. Spyros Galanis of the Department of Economics at City University of London. And Spyros will speak of the value of blockchain governance, which is crucial to an understanding of how the space works. And then we'll hear from Johannes Gugl, partner at Aaro Capital, one of Aaro's founders, about DLT infrastructure and its use cases. And these are proliferating across numerous industries like banking and finance, life sciences and healthcare, manufacturing and logistics. It's a very large list. And DLT is one of the technologies that lies at the very heart of the advances that are collectively spoken of as Industrial Revolution 4.0, the set of processes that will hopefully help the global economy to recover from the current crisis. On which note, I'll hand over to Spyros. Over to you.
Thank you, Stuart, for the invitation and for talking about introducing this very interesting talk. So let me get right into my topic. So I'm going to talk about the value of DLT governance, where DLT stands for Distributed Ledger Technology. And just to give you a short overview of what I'm going to talk about. So essentially, I'm going to talk about three subjects. So first, I'm going to talk about the corporate governance. So governance, which is about firms. So what we have up to now, let's say the state of the art in terms of governance. Then I'm going to talk about the DLT governance, and then I'm going to concentrate on two dimensions: informal versus formal, and off-chain versus on-chain. And then I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, and maybe give a few examples of what is happening now in this area, which I think is very exciting, because there are many interesting ideas on how you can govern these projects in a more efficient way. But I know the first question is essentially, why should we care? Why do we actually talk about DLT governance, and we don't really just copy everything that has been done in the past in terms of firms and the governance in the firms? So the question here is that in the beginning, for example, when we had Bitcoin, it was like a small project with very few people who were interested. And when they were actually deciding how to progress the project, how to change it, how to evolve it, it was a very small network, and therefore it was very easy to govern it this way. However, as the network increases in size and value, the issue of governance becomes more and more important, right? And that is why we're at the point where whenever you start a project, you have to, as one of the first characteristics, is to spell out how you're going to govern it. And there's a large academic literature which studies the impact of specific characteristics of good governance on operating efficiency and success. Now, on a previous webinar with Aaro Capital, I talked briefly about this as well, and I sort of mentioned and explained some of the key characteristics of good corporate governance, which we try to emulate also with DLT governance. And this is accountability, so the fact that you know who does what and who is accountable for specific actions. Security, which means that you need the organization to have a framework so that they can safeguard its assets and its decision protects its consumers and the firm itself. Transparency, this is a very important characteristic. It's about understanding how the decision process works and how decisions are being made. And risk management, which is about how the organization can manage the risk in terms of their decision, right? So they do not take unnecessary risks in terms of how they decide things. So just to go back now, so before DLT and the blockchain, right? So we have a very rich history of governance, right? Because we have the firms and people have always been sort of researching and wondering, what is the best way of governing an organization or a firm. And so corporate governance is essentially a system of rules, principles, and processes by which a company is directed and controlled. And the interesting and sort of the subtle point here is that this is not only about governing something, but it is also about balancing the interests of the main stakeholders, right? So on the one hand, we have the shareholders who own the company. We have the managers who actually manage it on a day-to-day business. And then we have other stakeholders like consumers, suppliers, the government, and so on. And most of these processes in this off-chain world, offline world, are formal, right? So they're written rules on how the process of decision-making works, and they're also centralized. And just to give you a very brief example of a corporate governance structure, so you see here sort of the main stakeholders, the annual shareholders meeting. So these are the shareholders who own the company, and then they can elect members in the supervisory board and the board of management. But then these two boards essentially provide information to the shareholders every year, and the shareholders can actually dismiss them or change this composition. At the same time, there is an interaction between the supervisory board and the board of management. So obviously there are many different types of governance that could actually slightly be different from what we see here, but that's sort of the main structure. What is important is essentially when I was talking about the balancing of interests, right? So what is the problem that a governance structure is solving? So the issue here, and this has been studied by economists for many, many years, is what we call the principal agent problem. So on the one hand, you have the principal, which is the shareholders. They own the company, and they can delegate authority and they can hire people to run it. On the other hand, you have the agent, which are the managers who do the day-to-day running of the business, right? So on the one hand, principal has all of the power. They can do whatever they want. But on the other hand, they have limited information about the day-to-day business, and they have limited monitoring about what the managers are doing. At the same time, the managers, what they do has a direct consequence on the payoff or of the welfare of principals. And there is a conflict of interest in principle because, for example, the shareholders want to maximize the share value of their company. The managers potentially would like to get a higher salary or be employed in this company, right? So the interest is not necessarily aligned, and there are many measures that are written within this corporate governance, for example, about sharing information, about the stock options, about how decisions are being made, that essentially tries to address this problem. And now we can go to DLT governance, right? So the immediate question would be, okay, so why don't we just copy the governance structure we have tried and tested for many decades in firms? Why don't we do exactly the same thing? And the answer is that actually DLT projects are slightly or sufficiently different from firms. So different governance structures are needed. The main characteristics is that the DLT project is usually decentralized. So no one owns the ledger and there are no shares, right? So it is a bit different what is the role of a shareholder, right? Because now we don't have one. At the same time, it is more difficult to establish ownership rights, right? Because the blockchain is not the same as a firm. A firm has a separate legal identity, it has certain rights and obligations. The blockchain is not exactly that. On the other hand, there are some similarities because as we're going to see, a lot of blockchains, they implement a way of voting in terms of deciding what to do next. And sometimes this is happening by owning the native cryptocurrency. So by owning the native cryptocurrency could confer voting rights. So you can view the native cryptocurrency or the token, the native token, as a way of saying that this is the shares, how essentially I participate in this project. At the same time, because of the lack of ownership rights, it is more easy for a project to split. And this is when we call it a hard fork, right? So if I want, I can go to the Bitcoin ledger, I can copy all of the transactions, and I can very easily create something else, which is going to be the Bitcoin 2.0, and it's going to have all of the history of transactions from up to now, right? Nobody forbids me from doing that. This would not be possible in a firm, right? Because you cannot go to a firm and copy their transactions and their information and do something on your own. So this is a very big difference. And at the same time, what is, I think, more exciting in the DLT space is that you have now the ability within the blockchain to code functions and procedures that are going to give you very new opportunities in terms of how you're going to run the blockchain, right? So I can say that there's an algorithm which says you propose a change, you vote on that, and then you implement the change automatically within the blockchain, which was not possible in the traditional structure of a firm. So now let's talk about the two dimensions. So the first dimension is in terms of formal versus informal governance. So Bitcoin and Ethereum are essentially implementing mostly informal governance. And this goes back to their history because they started as small projects with very few people and a small network. So the way it works even now is the following. So anybody can propose a change. Suppose that I want, for example, to increase the size of the block. So how many transactions I can write in every block for Bitcoin. Now, these changes, this proposal would be implemented and proposed through this Bitcoin improvement proposal system. So you start with a draft, and this could either be deferred or it could be proposed and then either rejected, withdrawn, or actually becoming active, right? So this becomes online. This provides some transparency. However, what is missing from this process is a voting procedure, right? So the decisions on whether to accept, defer, or reject the proposal are made using consensus. So what does it mean? It means that a group of people who are interested go together in an offline way, they talk with each other, and eventually agree on whether to accept or reject this proposal. So what are the advantages and the disadvantages of this procedure? On the one hand, deciding through consensus enables anyone to participate in theory. So anybody could, in principle, participate in the process and say their opinion. It is an ideal way of reaching decisions for small projects with few participants who share sort of similar goals. But at the same time, it is not as transparent, right? Because it's not clear how the consensus is achieved. And this becomes, the issue of transparency becomes more and more important when the project becomes bigger. There are many people with opposing interests and different agendas, right? And then this there's a bigger danger for the decision process to sort of deteriorate into a closed club where you have a few people, the key players, who are actually making the decisions without informing anyone. At the same time, you have, as we said, the danger of splits, right? So if I'm a small group within Bitcoin, and I feel that my proposals are never heard because there's a close club that makes a decision, then maybe I will have an incentive to split, right? To create a new blockchain with different rules where all the people who participate in that group are more have the same opinions as me. And of course, what prevents this split is what we call in economics a network effects, right? So anybody can split the Bitcoin. I can create my own Bitcoin tomorrow. However, the issue is whether other people are going to follow me, right? Because the value of a blockchain and the value of the network is essentially in the numbers and the people who actually use it and contribute to that. So the network effects essentially have two opposing effects. On the one hand, they prevent the fork, so they prevent the splitting. However, if you're a small group and you essentially want to split from the main group, what the network effect is causing is that essentially the only reason why you would break is if the change that you propose is very radical. Right, so if you just propose a change that is very minor with respect to the status quo, then nobody's going to follow you because everyone is going to follow the initial blockchain that has a lot of people from the beginning. If you want to break away, you have to propose something more radical, and this is an example with what happened with the Bitcoin. It first went to Bitcoin Cash and then to Bitcoin SV, and for example, Bitcoin SV is more radical in the sense that they allow for the block size to be arbitrary. They do not impose any caps on the block size. So what about the formal governance? So formal governance is more like closer to what's happening with respect to the corporate governance, the traditional type of a governance. So in that sense, you want to implement a formal type of a governance if you want to be more transparent. You want to avoid hard forks, so you want to have a spelled out, very specific procedure on how you make decisions. And one way in which you can do it is by embedding specific rules on the blockchain, right? Because then it also becomes formal, because anybody can inspect the blockchain. They can see what is the algorithm, they can see what is the code there. So they're very certain about how decisions are being made, right? So you move away from the consensus type of an approach into a more formal type of approach. So two examples of blockchain projects is Tezos, which provides a system of on-chain voting, where participants have votes in proportion to their coins, and Decreed, which uses delegated voting. So you can essentially vote by buying some tickets, which are then used for voting. Now, the other dimension which is interesting, and this is sort of a way in which blockchain governance or DLT governance breaks away from the past, because this is something that was not possible before, whereas the formal versus informal was also possible within a firm. The on-chain versus off-chain is something completely different, right? Why? Because as we said, on-chain governance is specific procedures which are directly coded within the blockchain. Okay, so they determine how you propose changes, how consensus via voting is reached, and how the final decision is implemented. And actually, the change within the blockchain could actually even be implemented automatically through coding, right? So you're pretty certain how the process is going to be carried out, how the decision is going to be made, who is voting, and how the decision is going to be implemented. Now, off-chain governance implements some decision process off the ledger, and they can be either formal or informal. Okay, so what about the advantages and the disadvantages of this process? So obviously, on-chain governance provides greater transparency, right? Because the process is clear when compared to a consensus or an off-chain approach. And in principle, this is going to reduce the possibility of a hard fork because the input of everyone is taken into account formally, right? So your proposal is proposed on the blockchain. You get the votes and you see how much of a support you have in this proposal without relying on a closed club of few key players who can actually shoot it down if they don't like it. And the more interesting part, in my view, is that because you can have this algorithmic way of thinking in terms of decision processes, then you can experiment and implement different types of governance which are not possible before. So two examples is futarchy and quadratic voting. So just to talk about quadratic voting, so what is quadratic voting? It means that you can vote for a particular change, and you can vote more than once, but every new vote that you implement is going to cost you more than the first one, right? So you can, let's say, pay 1 coin for the first vote, 2 for the second vote, 4 for the third vote, and so on. So what is the reason for this type of voting? Essentially, we want to implement intensity of preferences. So it could be that for some topic I'm very passionate and I'm willing to spend more money and show my intensity of preferences for this particular decision, whereas for some other decisions, it's not that important to me. And at the same time, you don't want this process to be hijacked by the people who are very rich and have a lot of coins, right? So even for rich people, you make it increasingly more and more expensive to get more votes. So this type of governance takes care of the intensity of preferences, and at the same time does not get hijacked by, let's say, the people who have a large stake. What about the disadvantages? So the disadvantages, it's first of all, I think this is one very interesting point, is that it's very difficult to implement a one stakeholder, one vote approach. And this is due to the fact that you have a public blockchain, which means that it is decentralized and pseudonymous, which means that in principle, nobody can verify your identity. So it is not possible to have a system where one person gets exactly one vote. So this is what we have in democracy, right? One person, one vote. If you want to be a purist and you want the public blockchain which is completely decentralized, and we do not rely on any central identity or, let's say, third intermediary, then you cannot have this approach. So the alternative is to have a one token, one vote system, but then this could be less democratic, right? Because people who have large stakes may hijack the process. They may try to implement their own agenda. And this can make it less and less interesting for people with small stakes, right? So if I have a small stake of coins, maybe I think that even voting does not matter anymore. So therefore, I will take less interest, which means that the big guys might actually steer away the project in a direction that is not of my liking. However, this could be remedied, for example, with quadratic voting, as I said, or with the other type of governance, which is futarchy. Okay, so I will stop here and take any questions that you might have. Stuart, can you hear me? Hello?
So maybe I jump in here, as it might seem like Stuart has a connection issue or we can't hear him. So maybe if later Stuart will rejoin, that he can ask question what he also received prior to this webinar.
Okay.
So yeah, potentially I'm taking over. Or Stuart, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Johannes, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes, I've been on for about 30 seconds. Yeah, I've got some questions which largely relate to ground that you've covered, Spyros. I wonder if you could expand on the question of whether this new type of government, futarchy, so-called, really, in your view, works. And explain exactly again, how it works. I'm not sure it's altogether clear to everyone out there.
Okay, thanks. So this is sort of so as I said, one of the nice things about this type of governance is that because you can code a lot of things on the blockchain, there are many algorithmic ways that you can implement, and this can give rise to many interesting ideas of how you can organize the decision-taking process, right? So futarchy is sort of a relatively new idea. It has been around for 5-10 years. It's about whenever we make a decision, right, the standard way would be to just vote on whether we want to do A or B, right? However, there are two elements in that decision. One is essentially to understand what is our value, so what we want to achieve. Let's say, for example, in 10 years, do we want to achieve a higher growth of GDP, for example, or lower growth? So this is our values. And then the second part is how do we achieve it? So what kind of tool do we want to use in order to achieve this particular value? So futarchy is about distinguishing between these two processes. So it says we vote on the values on what we want to achieve as in a democracy. However, the tool that we're going to use in order to achieve this particular value is going to be decided by experts, and how this is going to be decided by running in what we call a prediction market. So we're going to say that we're going to put essentially two tools into these experts, and they're going to try to predict whether the tool A or tool B is better at achieving this particular goal that the community has voted that they want to do. And these experts are going to be remunerated. So if they're actually correct in terms of their predictions, they're going to get money. And this is how the prediction markets work. And actually, it has been shown in economics that the prediction market is a very good way of aggregating information of different individuals so that we arrive at the best predictions that we can as a group. So essentially, this breaks down the process into two parts: the prediction and the values, voting on values. And I guess this can be done exactly because we have the blockchain, right? Because we can embed this all algorithmically inside the blockchain, and we can implement this at the same time. And actually, there's even some projects which are implementing prediction markets separately, like Aaro as well.
Okay. I came into this webinar with another question on my mind, just about why it's not possible to implement a one person, one vote system in a public blockchain. I think you kind of covered that, but something that would be good to cover in the couple minutes remaining before we hand over to Johannes. What's the difference between formal and on-chain governance?
Yeah, so sometimes this could be sort of conflated, right? Because whatever you write on chain, right? So if you write rules that are on the blockchain, in some sense, you can say that this is formal governance, right? Because these are specific rules that you are bound to implement. So in that sense, it is formal. But on the other hand, you can have a formal process by governing a firm or a blockchain, which is not on chain, right? So you can have something which is formal, but it is not on chain because it is implemented off chain. On the other hand, if you have something which is on chain, so you write it a specific rule on your blockchain, then I would classify this as formal. So in some sense, a formal rule can either be implemented on chain or off chain. The innovation of the blockchain is that it gives you this extra ability of putting some more formal rules and processes on chain, and it makes it more transparent, and it's more difficult to actually diverge from that. Whereas, for example, in a firm, you may have some formal rules, But maybe there's some leeway in terms of how you interpret them or how you apply to them. Whereas with blockchain, it's going to be much more rigid and much more transparent how you implement these formal rules.
Okay. Now, right now, because of time constraints, we're going to hand over to Johannes, but a couple more questions have come through the Q&A, which we'll come back to if we have time at the end. I would stress to everyone who's in attendance, everyone who's here with us for this webinar, that if you have any questions that remain unanswered today, you're at liberty to contact Aaro, because they'll be very happy to answer any questions that you have. We can't possibly cover everything in short. But right now we're going to pass on the baton to Johannes Gugl from Aaro Capital. And Spyros, do stay online because we may have time to come back to you. And Johannes is going to speak about DLT infrastructure and and use cases. Johannes, we'll pass over to you. We'll have some questions. Please feel free to pass your questions in if you're in the audience, and we'll have time for questions at the end. Johannes, over to you now.
All right. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Spyros, also for this great insights into the governance. I want to follow on now with DLT infrastructure and its use cases, and therewith I want to cover how it is coming from information technology to distributed technology. Then I want to go a little bit into the DLT protocols and its use case characteristics, then cover some real-world DLT use cases, and also have a little bit of future outlook for DLT. So first of all, when we're talking about really the transformation now from information to value, we also have to put it into perspective on traditional or the past innovation cycles, what we have seen, as new technologies require many years of research and development, which recently comes also with the expense of early investors and product creators. The following characteristics for new technology are becoming barriers to commercial adoption. First of all, use cases in a short run to motivate really product developers to learn and contribute towards this technology. And then in the second stage, when a critical mass of people that believe in that technology before even it's an advantage over an advanced technology can be realized. And third, when really the sufficient hype and overconfidence of expectations in order to attract top talent and capital that help to overcome the initial high cost of development and experimenters. And finally, when really sufficient concentration of early profits that incentive and allow for efficient coordination and allocation of resources, those promoting further developments and adoption. So the DLT market currently satisfies these four conditions relatively well. And to put that also in the current DLT market cycle into perspective, it is useful also to compare it with the previous information technology market cycle. So there have been the three major cycles in the past. The first between 1950 and 1970, which was the hardware, where really IBM was the leader in that. And then the second wave came then with the software between 1917 to 1990s, where we clearly saw also Microsoft as the winner, but also other more enterprise software solutions like SAP, for example, which came out later. And then we went into this network area between 1990 and 2010, where we saw really then from AltaVista, Yahoo, then coming over to Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, which are currently really the leaders in this space. So when we also put it into perspective into that information cycle of innovation, that is we always see that we have a first expansion, which is driven by open standards and decreasing costs, which leads then to an increase in users and intense competition from startups also. And then we're going into the consolidation phase, where the winners really building proprietary systems on top of open standards and stifling competition. And finally then, when it comes then to the demand of decentralization, to open source alternatives, which then really contributes then to the further expansion of that also. When we also look at the Gartner hype cycle, we see also that we can put that always into this Gartner hype cycle, where we see that it's first really it starts with the initial, like the technology trigger, where, as I already mentioned, developers are really working to use this new technology to create use cases out of it, and which creates then a kind of hype also. That hype, what we have seen, for example, also in 2017, was then, especially in this blockchain industry, pushed by the possibility to issue even like own tokens as a new form of funding, as like replacing traditional venture capital, for example, also, which then really led to an overheating of the market, as like the expectation was too high for that really what the technology at that point could really deliver. So normally you see like that in this situation, the infrastructure for the future expansion is developed, which was not really fully done in that cycle in 2017. So that took a little bit more time to really overcome some shortcomings of this technology, and they would want to look a little bit also how that all derives. So overall, the distributed ledger technology is like a combination of different technologies which have been explored, starting really with the cryptographical solutions which have been discovered already, like in the 1940s, 50s, like in the war times, etc., and where they further worked on that. But also then later, when we're talking about like peer-to-peer networks, also in terms of like file transfer, news files, we have seen also often like more than the pirate space area. But those are the components which really came together then to form really the concept of blockchain, which the mysterious like Satoshi Nakamoto brought out with his white paper in 2008. Then with 2009, really with the Bitcoin blockchain going live, and as I mentioned already, then really going further into this ICO hype. But first, it was also then the next step out of that was really then the development of the decentralized computer concept, when the founders of Ethereum really took that advantage and said like, okay, we can use that nodes even like to perform decentralized computing power and really create a decentralized global network of computers, which then really came with the Ethereum concept, and there with also with the smart contracts there, where you say like smart contracts is really the protocol which can trigger then certain processes out of the conditions which are hard-coded into this protocol. What we have seen then really after 2017 was this kind of like, digital hallucination, but also at the same time, really the further work of all those companies like tier one layers on the protocol levels to like overcome really the shortcomings. I will go in that a little bit later also, which is called like the trilemma of the blockchain technology. But what we have seen is really that since that, a lot of new protocols came up with certain like use cases, or really to solve shortcomings of the existing blockchain technologies. So we are now on a certain like point on the edge where we can see really that we have already an infrastructure where we can build really efficient use cases on it. So we see it every day that companies, like really big corporations, startups, but also like government organizations launching new blockchain use cases. So this is really an exciting point currently now in 2020 going into 2021, where we see really the use cases going into life. So as I described, like it really starts with Bitcoin concept, then also with Litecoin, which was like an adoption also of the Bitcoin concept. Then we saw then Ethereum, but also then coming up like more like the enterprise based systems with permissioned ledgers, which are like Hyperledger, R3-Corda, and then also other blockchain technologies like Neo or Tron, which are more the Asian based ones, or Waves, which is more the Russian solution in the blockchain space. And then later also like Algorand, as you already mentioned before, also Tezos, which was a little bit later, but what unfortunately was not really that was how it was planned, as most of us know. But also Cardano, which had really a research-oriented approach and launched their mainnet pretty late. Then also 2019 or more 2020, and then we saw also concepts like Definity, Quantum, which was just recently sold, like which was a JP Morgan project initially, which was recently sold to Consensus, which is normally really the arm of the Ethereum organization or foundation. And then we have also like interesting concept like Hedera Hashgraph, which is not a blockchain in that sense, which is then another solution, which is then what we call a direct acyclic graph. What we see also now is 2020 and beyond, really those solutions like Avalanche, especially like Cosmos or Polkadot. Cosmos, which is really very much leaning into this DeFi space, developed the solution, but is also interoperable, as well as like Polkadot. Or just recently, we also see like saw Solana, a new player coming into that space, which also solves the efficiency, but also security in that protocol area. So when we look also on the overall universe of DLT protocols, we see that there are already dozens of different protocols from, as I mentioned, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Hyperledger, but also others like Ontology or Zilliqa, Lisk, Definity. So that's even not the full list here. I just wanted to give the audience a little bit an impression what protocols, which blockchains are already on the market and really compete on the future use cases there. So some of them really placed into that DLT trilemma on decentralization, scalability, and safety, as we see like Arc and Cosmos is more on the side of decentralization, scalability, where EOS is more focusing really on EOS and XRP on scalability and safety, and Bitcoin and Ethereum clearly on decentralization, safety, which is harming also knowingly their efficiency behind that. So when we talk about blockchain technologies, we also have to distinguish between the blockchain as before mentioned already, the direct acyclic graph, and with blockchain, the permissioned blockchains and the permissionless blockchains. So the permissioned, which are more like the enterprise or conglomerate blockchain technologies, and the permissionless, which are really more the open source, like public blockchains, there where you need like another governance structure also behind, which Spyros covered before. So when we see really look into the key differences on permissionless and permissioned blockchains, so as mentioned, like main difference on permissionless is you do not require permission to participate in the consensus, whereby in the permissioned blockchains you require permission to participate. So key characteristics of the permissionless blockchains are, for example, that it's really truly decentralized, where everybody can join also like as a node or now also as a staker. It's really a transparent network. So with the explorers, you really can look up the transactions. It is fully immutable, and it usually involves one or more crypto assets or token, also as like an incentive system, which really drives then also the tokenomics. And the advantage to that is really that it's open to all, that it brings really trust to all users, that it's a high security environment, and that it's censorship resistant. Disadvantages is like this slow transaction speeds, which we are also overcoming more and more also in permissionless blockchains. It's harder to scale also in that sense, and it's also often like not energy efficient. Yeah, like typical use cases, cryptocurrency payments, decentralized finance, also typical permissionless blockchains, and overall like dApps with a broad community focus in that. So typical examples is like Ethereum, EOS, Cardano, Tron, Neo, Stellar, Tezos, or Algorand, and many others. However, permissioned blockchains key characteristics is like the governance structure, the private transactions of that, like for example, consortiums in supply chain networks, for example, also. Then the authentication process, what you need, and that also that no crypto assets or token is needed often. So initially, like Hyperledger Corridor doesn't even have that token crypto asset focus into their transaction, because it was more meant to serve as an enterprise solution, or as I said, like conglomerate solution. So the advantage is really then that you have a much faster transactions also through that smaller node network. It is a scalable network, also putting more nodes in it in a corporate environment. It is potentially more cost effective also, but it is censored, which is wished, which is really that you need that censorship also, that you avoid any people like contributing, which shouldn't be also in that. Disadvantages is that it's not really truly decentralized. This is also often the critics, for example, with Ripple, with XRP. Is less transparent. That's clear also, because that's also wished, like not everybody should have access to the transactions and see that those transactions, and it is partially immutable also, which is also, it's not always a disadvantage, but compared to a permissionless blockchain, like it shows like a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage of that. So banking and payments within banking and closed payment system, there are the use cases. Supply chain management, as I said, also like with the conglomerate, and food tracking, for example, also is one good example of a permissioned blockchain. And those players, those protocols in like Hyperledger, R3 Corda, Consensus Quorum now, and Ripple. What is also interesting here is like Hyperledger, for example, is more coming out from the open source community out of the Linux Foundation, whereas R3 Corda is really like a cooperation of many different, like more enterprise level companies, but also foundations and governments. So let's dive in a little bit into the real world use cases and see like what is really the difference between like a web-based app and a decentralized app, where we see like a web-based app is used with a normal web browser, with the web frontend and the web server backend, which is communicating. And compared to that, decentralized app has also a wallet integrated. So when you download or interact with that blockchain, it first creates a transaction to the wallet, and the wallet then to the nodes to verify and validate that transaction also. And that also involves, and as I said, also tokens, which even allows you and enables you to execute such a transaction in. And then you have also back a web server front end interface, where the data is then displayed if the transaction is then executed and transformed. So that's basically the main difference between a web-based app and a decentralized app behind that. So when we look also in a traditional payment system, everybody who has been in that industry, who has looked in that, we know all that the traditional payment is a highly complex process with many different intermediaries between. So if you're going to a merchant store, if you're buying, you first have to open like a payment gateway linking to the payment processor, which is then really checking the status of the confirmation, checks the card details, etc. Has to also communicate with the credit card associated, and that also with the issuing bank and acquiring bank, which is involved to really pay that back. So you see, like it's a highly complex process, where those players also earn like a high fees on that, which then leads to high costs in all these transactions, as we know in the traditional industry. Whereby if you compare it with a DLT system, there you really have a peer transaction. You know, although like also if you involve a merchant with a payment, like what we also see more and more coming up is that you can pay even with cryptocurrencies already, transforming it into fiat, where you only have like a DLT node, which is then confirming the transaction. And as soon as those transactions are confirmed, packed into the blockchain as a cryptographically secured transaction, then the payment is immediately done peer-to-peer. So there's a huge difference, and that's also the reason why more and more banks, financial industries, and everybody is really exploring this industry, because that issue is well known, that too many players on a security level have to be involved into that traditional system, which is not required anymore in a DLT system. Also, when we see like Ripple-based wires versus traditional bank wires, where you see like that we have at 1 to 5 days when such a trade is really settled. So that's really a long time. We all experienced that. I think banks, and also especially like the new players, improving that more and more. But when we compare it, for example, with a Ripple-based system, and also like others which are playing like with utility settlement coins, which is only a couple of seconds, as we see here, Ripple with 6 seconds here. So we have also really a huge efficiency gain through this technology. So in the last couple of years, we have seen really a lot of prominent companies joining this space. Whereby, for example, Bank of Canada was one of the earliest ones, also, which has also been a co-founder of the Blockchain Research Institute, and also partnered with MIT for a digital currency. We all know IBM, for example, also, which has also early start to develop blockchain for integration for enterprises, and really offer their everything from concept to go live and operations of that, like also like called like blockchain as a service solutions. Or we have also companies known very famously like JP Morgan, MasterCard, Oregon State Street, who are researching a lot. But when we also look into really the industry use cases, what we see here, I mean, obviously financial services has a lot of use cases. It was the initial major use case in terms of really cross-border payments, as we don't have borders as such in a blockchain environment. The tokenization of assets, what we've seen also coming up with the ERC20 token standards from Ethereum, the exchange infrastructure also, which more and more companies like also like the stock exchange of Stuttgart, but also the Frankfurt, the Deutsche Börse is working on it, or also as we know the SIX, or the Swiss stock exchange with the Swiss digital exchange. Trading, investment, that's clear. Trade finance, that's also like a huge business case in this financial service. And what we see now a lot is the central bank digital currencies, where we see really big use cases, like in France, for example, where Société Générale, and now also Consensus and SEBA Bank from Switzerland is working there on the prototyping. But we see like in China, in Russia, in many countries, in Sweden, who are researching in that space and developing really the first, like I would say, prototypes of central bank digital currency. Peer-to-peer lending, KYC, ML are also very prominent use cases in this space. In the automotive, it's also pretty interesting, because automotive, a lot of companies are working already in that space, because there are use cases like parts tracking, which is really a huge topic in the automotive industry, also in terms of like provenance, then in the after parts market, or like a vehicle ledger, where we also see companies working more and more towards that a car has its own ledger, where they can then perform automatic payments of tolls, for example, parking, but also like electric vehicle charging. Autonomous driving, vehicle to everything communication, it's also interesting. And we even see that the automotive industry, or the future of automotive and all this digitalization, is where we see that the blockchain technology is the big enabler in this future of automotive, also in terms of car sharing and future of mobility. and also like service ledger, for example, what we have here, that instead of that we have really a physical book, we have really a service ledger where even with hard coded in like when the next service has to be, or even with AI technology, which can then analyze then the data of different cars and can even predict when the next car, when the car has to go back to the service, or when a part maybe is end of its life cycle. So that's very exciting. Also, manufacturing, that's also a huge part where we see huge potential in terms of supply chain management anywhere, tracking and tracing, IoT, where companies are working with like Honeywell, for example, Bosch and Cisco. Provenance, again, also is a big topic in manufacturing anyway. Inventory management, demand prediction, 3D printing. So there are huge use cases. And also in the manufacturing industry, we have to say like that the blockchain industry is a big enabler of the digital factory, also of industry 4.0, and all those like new technologies coming up into that space. Energy sector is also a sector with peer-to-peer energy trading, looking really into when you have your own solar solution where you can sell your energy directly into the network, and for that gaining tokens, and that tokens then exchanged in for energy back when you're needing it. But also smart meters, EV charging and billing, etc. That's really also use cases we are seeing or we saw already coming into life. So we can also go back to this Gartner hype cycle, where we also can see that the different solutions are also like on different stages into this hype cycle, where we say like, okay, digital asset exchange, cryptocurrencies, etc. That is already into this slope of enlightenment and went down already, the big hype. But other solutions here in terms of like blockchain in retail, for example, or also smart assets, decentralized autonomous organizations, they're just at the beginning, and that will take a little bit longer. Although this chart is unfortunately from 2019, so in 2020 for sure that all moved a little bit further, and we're much more advanced in 2020 already. So future outlook also to end this session is like Deloitte in last year, or like in early 2020, made this survey with 1,480 senior executives in 14 countries, where 36% of them reported that they will invest 5 million or more in the blockchain technology in 2020, which is a huge number already. And even when we see like 12% investing more than 10 million in this year already into the blockchain technology. And also when we look in their strategic priorities, where already 55% see it as a critical part and top 5 strategic priority for the future. So looking at the watch, I would say like thank you for the time. Maybe also to explain, like we're going into that also deeper. So if you want to have a further look, a lot of that presentation is covered in our documents, what you find also on our website. So go on it, load it down if you want to get to know more about that, what I was talking about. Okay.
Johannes, that was brilliant. You've brought the most tremendous enthusiasm to your presentation, and I think that conveys some of the very real excitement that surrounds developments in this space. And that, again, does include the opportunities for very rewarding investment. There are tremendous opportunities, both in the crypto space and in terms of getting in front of developments, in terms of the adoption of broader DLT technology by different corporate players in different sectors. Very finally, very quickly, Johannes, in the minute that's left to us, if you had to nominate the 2 or 3 most exciting use cases in terms of their impact on particular industries, what would they be?
Yeah, I think decentralized finance has obviously really right to exist over the long term, as we also see that really the financial industries are looking more and more into such solutions, how they can offer also new kind of solutions to the industry, but also clearing and settlement solutions, for example, in terms of like the banks and the exchanges, how they're working together. So that's very exciting. Also, like utility settlement coins for an increasing performance or like lower costs and faster transaction between transactions. I think that's a major use case. And overall, I would say, like in the automotive and the manufacturing industry, I see the blockchain DLT technology really as the enabler of future technologies also, which can build on that, you know. And I even worked on that a couple of years ago in the automotive industry to evaluate and identify really that it is like really crucial for the future to enable such a blockchain or DLT solution in those industries.
Okay, Johannes, thank you, and thank you, Spyros. Brilliantly interesting webinar, and I'll say again to all participants, look at the Aaro website to see the white papers, the thought leadership pieces, the shorter pieces as well. That are on there, very informative, and do get in touch if you'd like to find out more about the opportunities in this space. They're undeniable, they're uncorrelated, they're substantial. Thanks again to everyone, and we're finishing right on time. Look out for news of the next webinar, which should be equally interesting. Thanks to everyone.